Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. Without objection, the presiding member is authorized to declare recess at any time. I'm going to go through a couple of quick housekeeping matters. Votes are expected sometime in the next 30 minutes. We hope to get through Mr. Cummings and my opening statements and some of yours before that happens. But when votes are called, we'll recess for the duration of the votes and reconvene thereafter. My colleagues aren't here yet, but hopefully staff will let them know. One of our witnesses has a hard stop at 3 o'clock today, so in the interest of fairness to all the members, I'm going to be uncharacteristically enforcing the 5-minute rule in hopes that my colleagues will be uncharacteristic in following the 5-minute rule. And to our audience, we welcome your attendance and interest in today's hearing. Housing Committee rules prohibit any manifestation of approval or disapproval of these proceedings, including the display of objects and signs. And you may be assured this will be your only warning. The census is critical to apportioning the most fundamental of rights, which is the right to be counted, and therefore, subject to other qualifications, the right to vote. One person, one vote is embedded in the fabric of our jurisprudence. The census is also critical in the efficient apportionment of government resources and services. Acquiring meaningful and accurate data helps make the sometimes tough decisions on how best to allot those things that are in limited supply. As we have noted before, few things are as eminently predictable as the decennial census. It comes every 10 years, whether we're ready for it or not. The 2020 census is entering an important period. The 2018 test is underway, and even with the significance of that, final operations for the 2020 census have appropriately begun. The Census Bureau is already conducting the local update of census addresses and in-office address canvassing. It's important to understand the status of those projects. We also need to examine the readiness of the IT systems, which are so indispensable to the 2020 count. The accuracy of the 2020 census rests in large measure on the successful deployment of IT systems. The 2018 test plays a vital role in assessing these symptoms, and the realistic expectation is that any and all flaws will be addressed quickly. We'll compare today what we hear from the Bureau with the GAO's assessment of the IT systems. The gap between the Bureau's self-assessment and the GAO's independent review, if any, will necessarily raise concerns and warrant further exploration. We understand there is communication between Census and GAO, but this communication must be a priority so the 2020 census meets or exceeds our appropriately lofty expectations. Funding remains critical to an accurate census. Our colleagues on the Appropriations Committee provided fiscal year 2018 funding for the 2020 census, even above the requested levels. We expect the census to be good stewards of these resources, particularly in a time when public trust and public spending is not high and other important, albeit perhaps not constitutionally specific programs are being impacted. The Census Bureau and the Department of Commerce need to provide our committee with their spending plan for the fiscal year 2018 funding. We look forward to working with today's witnesses and with the Appropriations Committee to ensure proper funding is also available in fiscal year 2019 and fiscal year 2020. The census is constitutionally significant. It is mentioned with particularity in the jurisdiction of this committee. It is relied upon by the governmental entities and is directly related to the fundamental right to vote and for those rights and for those votes to be counted fairly and proportionally. So not only this committee, but Congress as a whole takes its responsibility to review progress seriously. There may be differences in certain areas, but each of us shares the common objective of a count we can have confidence in come 2020. And with that, I'll recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I really do appreciate this hearing. Persons. That is what our Constitution requires the government to count every 10 years in the census. Not citizens, not immigrants, persons. That means everybody counts. The census is supposed to be nonpartisan. It is supposed to be conducted by experts who try to get the most accurate count possible. But the Trump administration is now politicizing the census by rushing to insert a new, untested question about citizenship that will discourage people from responding and result in an inaccurate count. That's what I said, result in an inaccurate count. The Trump administration's stated rationale for adding this question is that they want, listen to this one, that they want to protect the rights of voters in our country, and they need this new data to do it. Give me a break. With all due respect, that rationale is almost as hard to believe as President Trump claimed that he fired James Comey because he was too hard on Hillary Clinton. Give me a break. The rationale is also difficult to believe because the Trump administration's record on voting rights goes in the exactly opposite direction, suppressing legitimate voters, suppressing them. So now they come up with this question that's supposed to help people vote more. For example, President Trump falsely accused millions of Americans of voting illegally in the last election. The president then set up a sham commission to go out and try to find evidence to back up his false claim. He appointed Kansas Governor Chris Kobach to lead the commission. Last month, Mr. Kobach was held in contempt of court for failing to inform his own state's voters that they could register to vote. Finally, the president dissolved his commission without identifying any evidence to support his claims. What about the Justice Department? They asked for this new citizenship question, supposedly to help enforce the Voting Rights Act. However, during the entire tenure of the Trump administration, the Justice Department has not filed a single new voting rights action. In fact, Attorney General Jeff Sessions has criticized the Voting Rights Act as intrusive. He said it's intrusive to help people vote in America. And so the department revised the U.S. Attorney's Manual to remove references to racial gerrymandering. During the Trump administration, the Department of Justice has reversed its position 3 times. In one case on gerrymandering in Texas, in another case on voter purging in Ohio, and in a third case on a voter ID law in Texas. All in favor of, you guessed it, voter suppression. On March 22, 2018, a coalition of some of the nation's most esteemed voting rights advocates and organizations sent a letter to the Commerce Department condemning this new question. They explained that this data has never been needed since Congress first passed the Voting Rights Act in 1965. According to their letter, and I quote, the DOJ maintains that a new citizenship question will ensure better enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. Ladies and gentlemen, this is false. Since the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, the census has never asked all persons to report their citizenship. They went on, and I quote, to say, in other words, a mandatory question on citizenship has never been necessary to ensure robust protection of the right to vote. That is just as true now as it was in 1965 when the Voting Rights Act was passed. Think about it. The most prominent voting rights groups in the country say that the Trump administration's rationale for adding the citizenship question is false. When the Secretary of Commerce announced the new citizenship question, he conceded that the Census Bureau's own experts raised concerns that it was going to reduce response rates. The appropriate action would have been to test the question to see if those concerns were borne out. That is what 6 former census directors recommended. Instead, the administration just flipped the burden. They added a question and claimed that nobody demonstrated response rates would be lower. Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, as we have tried to investigate this issue, we've been blocked. We requested documents from the experts inside the Census Bureau who raised concerns about this question, but the administration provided none. They told us that they might give us a subset of the documents we requested after Memorial Day, when they're required to produce them to private litigants. This is not the way oversight is supposed to work. As I close, 2 weeks ago, all the Democrats on this committee sent a letter asking you to subpoena these documents so we could review them before today's hearing, so as we might be effective and efficient as possible. But you did not respond. We did not get the documents, and we are now constrained in our questioning of these witnesses. Mr. Chairman, this issue is squarely within our committee's jurisdiction. For all these reasons, I would like to ask whether you intend to issue a subpoena, and with that, I yield back, and thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The votes have been called. I'm going to introduce the panel of witnesses, and then we will break and go vote and come back and hear your opening statements. We're pleased to have Mr. Earl Comstock, Director of the Office of Policy and Strategic Planning at the United States Department of Commerce, Dr. Ron Jarman, Acting Director of the U.S. Census Bureau, Mr. David Pounder, Director of Information Technology Management Issues at the USGAO, Mr. Robert Goldenkopf, Director of Strategic Issues, Census Issues at the USGAO, and Mr. Justin Levitt, Associate Dean for Research at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. Mr. John Gore, Acting Director, Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division at the United States Department of Justice, was invited. Congress, and more importantly, the people we represent, would benefit from his testimony and appearance, but he isn't here, which is disappointing, to say the least. Should he decide to show up, there is a seat waiting for him. If he does not decide to show up, then we will have another opportunity to quiz him about some of the issues that have already been raised. With that, we will go vote, and we are in recess.
We're going to get him another time.
You know what? I understand the litigation part. They wanted me to move this here in a month. And I said, I'm not going to move it.
Okay.
Because in a month, there's no guarantee it's going to be over.
Right.
So really what they objected to was sitting at the panel